What's up, people? I'm Erica, and this is Cocktails and Capitalism, a podcast that pairs crafted beverages with stories distilled from our capitalist hellscape. It's an honor to be joined by South Minneapolis activist and freelance journalist Marjaan Sirdar, who has spent the past few years writing a 12-part investigative series about Target's dystopian mass surveillance police partnership. Titled 21st Century Jim Crow in the North Star City, the series exposes the company's targeted, high-tech surveillance of youth and adults experiencing homelessness and the ways that its partnership with every level of law enforcement has effectively rolled back civil rights for Black folks and others across America. Marjaan is also the host of People Power Podcast, a show that speaks truth to power by amplifying voices from the grassroots. So glad to have you on the show, Marjaan. How are you?
I'm doing well. Thank you. It's great to be with you. And it's great timing to have this conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh my God. And we'll definitely be going into that a bit with the way that Target is in the news right now for diversity, equity, and inclusion, elimination of that program. But yeah, there's so much more that we need to be mad at Target about that we're going to go into today. And we've got a lovely cocktail for everyone. The name is the Burnt Out Precinct, which I love that you came up with that name. Thank you so much for that one.
Woo woo.
And it is made of 30 milliliters of lemon juice, 30 milliliters of ginger honey syrup, 10 milliliters of grenadine, just a tiny pinch of salt, 45 milliliters of soda water, and you garnish it with a lemon wheel. And I have added mezcal to my drink because it kind of adds that burnt out, that smoky flavor to it as well. So I'm excited to try that with the combo. Shaking it up. Getting that ASMR. I haven't tried it with the mezcal yet, so I'm excited. I think it's way better with it, actually. I'm really, really stoked on that combo. Oh, wow. Damn. Yeah, you folks should definitely try this out. And it's supposed to have like a lemon wheel as the target there. So we will, yeah.
The bullseye, huh?
The bullseye, exactly.
Nice.
Which I just realized is the name of the dog, the mascot dog.
Uh-huh, yep.
He's definitely a police dog, but... So... Let's just jump right into it. You've been investigating Target for years now, and I'm really curious about what first led you to want to look into the Target Corporation.
So over, I think 12 years ago, I worked in downtown Minneapolis at a social service organization. And so I was a case manager. I worked with homeless youth, young people from ages 17, 18 up to 24. Who were living on the streets and in shelters and doubled up. And so I ran a young men's group. It was a African-American men's group. And almost all the clients at the agency were Black. Every Thursday we would get pizza and we would chop it up. And out of those conversations came the young men that I work with disclosing their issues with the Minneapolis police. They talked about brutality, harassment in downtown. Working at the social service agency, it came to light from supervisors that Target was really driving the police brutality and the harassment in downtown Minneapolis. And so I worked there for about 4 years, and I think it was in the second year that I worked there, it went from a well-respected organization in the community to being taken over by Target and the police. Its board of directors were actually literally taken over by Target and the Minneapolis police. The Minneapolis police chief was on the board of directors, might have actually been the president of the board of directors. And so it was through that work that I first learned about all of this. And I never really knew the extent of the surveillance program until actually after George Floyd's murder, and a lot of old news articles started to resurface. So I got to hear firsthand from the young men about what was going on downtown, but I wasn't really able to put it all together and how sophisticated this operation was until a decade later.
Wow.
And actually, and so I'll talk a little bit about this program as we go on, but one of my clients was he was a 16-year-old kid. He was a really sweet kid. He wasn't violent by any means, but he was like the number one. He was like number one on this list called the Downtown 100 that I'll get into. But my experience working with him and working with the young men made me realize like how ridiculous this project was and how they were criminalizing young people who were vulnerable and who needed services and needed support. They did not need incarceration and police harassment.
I love that you came to this story by actually knowing the people who are directly affected by it and, hearing their stories firsthand. I can see why that would drive you to dive deep into the story and really uncover the injustices here.
Right. And it's funny because I never really had plans to be a journalist. I was a case manager. I'm a teacher and educator, and I was a community organizer for many years. And
Awesome.
me and some community members, we started up a grassroots newspaper in the neighborhood, and so I did some contributing to our community newspaper. But it wasn't until after George Floyd's murder when I really started to work as a freelance journalist, and I was actually getting paid to do that work. And that's when I really dove into this Target mass surveillance project that we're going to get into.
And I'm so glad that you did, because this is a part of the story of George Floyd, the story of the movement for Black lives that has been very, very underreported. And you've gone so deep with it that it's really the work that you've done is incredibly vital and groundbreaking.
Thank
And
you.
so let's get into that a bit. I was hoping that you could tell us about the birth of Target's mass surveillance program and its partnership with police and prosecutors. How did this program come about nearly 2 decades ago?
So actually, its origins are almost 3 decades ago.
Oh, wow.
So before Target was actually part of this, there was a public-private partnership that came to fruition through Honeywell. And so Honeywell, many people know as a weapons manufacturer, and Honeywell is a huge Minneapolis corporation. Goes back 100 years, or maybe even more. And they do tons of things, but manufacturing weapons is what they're most notorious for, and what they were protested here in the Twin Cities pretty frequently for. In the mid 90s, Minneapolis, just like many cities, were experiencing, a lot of crime, a lot of violence, a lot of gang violence. So there's an interesting story about Minneapolis. I'll try to make it short, but in the early 90s, it elected its first black and its first woman mayor, and the only black mayor Minneapolis ever had. And so she rose to power on the heels of wanting to reform the Minneapolis police. So just a few years before she became the mayor, the Minneapolis police conducted a botched warrant. They served a warrant on the wrong home, and they ended up killing. They murdered an elderly black couple. I believe that was 1989. And then a few years later, the Minneapolis police murdered a young 16-year-old black kid named Tysel Nelson. And so that created tons of protests. So this was right around the time of Rodney King's famous beating in LA, national protests and uprisings happening. And so Minneapolis had its own issues going on. So this is the early 90s. So the mayor, her name was Sharon Sales Belton. She took office in, I believe it was 93, wanting to reform the Minneapolis police. So in turn, MPD rebelled against her, against their boss, and they began a work slowdown. And so, of course, crime skyrocketed, right? Through community members and insiders, I've learned that the Minneapolis police was behind much of the crime, directly or indirectly.
Of course,
And in 1995, Minneapolis was the nation's capital of murders, and it was given the nickname Murderapolis. So on the heels of that, in 96, there was the creation of this public-private partnership spearheaded by Honeywell. They brought in other Twin Cities corporations, and the goal was to create a better reputation for the city, for businesses, and to so-called clean up, the crime and whatnot.
Mm-hmm.
At least that was the stated goals. And so they created a program. It was called Minnesota HEALS, and HEALS was an acronym for Hope, Education, and Law and Safety. And the problem is, about a year after they created this program, Honeywell packed up and moved its global headquarters to Charlotte, North Carolina. And so, like I said, Honeywell is a huge corporation. They do many things. And one of the things they do is they have massive data, from 100 years of being a corporation. And so they have the infrastructure to do a lot of things that the city of Minneapolis and Hennepin County couldn't do with this public-private partnership. So when they left, there was a huge void. So Target came in around the year 2000, and they filled that void. So Target was a discount retail store under the Dayton's Corporation. Dayton's was kind of like Minnesota's Marshall Fields. In the late 90s, Dayton's really started to kind of go under, as many of those department stores, started to kind of die out, and the Walmarts kind of took over. And so Target went from a discount retailer to more of a chic kind of retailer. And so Target went from being under the Dayton's umbrella to taking over. And so it incorporated as the Target Corporation in around the year 2000. It moved its global headquarters to downtown Minneapolis. Around 2002, Target began funding the Hennepin County Attorney's Office. And at the time, the county attorney was Amy Klobuchar, who is now a U.S. Senator. And so Target funded a prosecutor and a paralegal in her office. And really, they were able to set the parameters of law enforcement because of that unique partnership. And so what Target did was, now that they had their global headquarters in downtown Minneapolis, they started to call the shots in the city. And so by then, there was a new mayor, a white guy named R.T. Ryback, and he was a huge partner of Target. They were really trying to clean up downtown Minneapolis, and they wanted to make it a friendly environment for quote unquote young corporate professionals. And so we're talking about young white people from the suburbs coming into downtown Minneapolis to work. So what they wanted to do was they needed to get rid of the homeless populations. They need to get rid of black youth who are hanging out downtown. And now, I was a black youth who hung out downtown in the 90s, right? When I was in high school and junior high. And so that was something, that had gone on for years and years and years. But it wasn't until the early 2000s when they really decided that it was a problem, and they wanted to, essentially they wanted to whitewash downtown and make it presentable for not just the workers, the Target workers, but Target's suburban base. Target's historic suburban base were white women from the suburbs. That led to a massive surveillance apparatus. So Target in 2003, they opened up a state-of-the-art crime lab in the suburbs, and they opened up their crime lab to law enforcement to access for free. And I'm not just talking about the police. I'm talking about FBI, CIA, NSA, the Department of Homeland Security, ICE, you name it.
Yeah.
Target does free forensics work for our government. And the following year in 2004, Target donated dozens of surveillance cameras to downtown Minneapolis to assist the prosecutor in cleaning up downtown, and going after, really the focus was going after low-level offenders. So we're not talking about violent offenders. We're not talking about murderers. We're talking about vagrancy. We're talking about panhandlers, homeless folks, black youth, street youth. And so they funded the Hennepin County Attorney's Office to arrest people for what they called livability crimes, right? And so a livability crime, for folks who are unfamiliar, is not a real crime. It's a non-crime. It's more of a violation, something that would typically you'd get ticketed for. So like jaywalking, spitting on the ground, littering, stuff like that. Like those are non-crimes. They're loitering, exactly. Loitering was a big one. And so those are things that you would normally get ticketed for. Graffiti, right? Graffiti is a old issue that people throughout inner cities are familiar with and probably annoyed with, but nevertheless, it's not something that you put somebody in jail for, right?
Yeah.
Until Target really started calling the shots in downtown Minneapolis.
I want to just quickly add, I was shocked doing the reading to prepare for this episode, reading through so much of your investigative journalism. I was shocked to learn that there was very little violent crime in downtown Minneapolis to begin with. There was not, it wasn't really a concern about violence ever. It was a concern about aesthetics, about the feeling of what it felt like for people with money, the customers going there,
That's right.
and feeling like it was icky around there,
That's
which
right.
is just like code for we don't like the homeless folk around here and we'd want to get rid of them. It's so insidious and disgusting.
That's right. And icky is literally, it's a quote from a Minneapolis police official, right? He admitted, he's quoted in a report that downtown Minneapolis was actually one of the safest parts of the city. And obviously, one of the wealthiest parts of the city is the business district. And it costs a lot of money to live in downtown Minneapolis. And so, it wasn't about violence. It was about making downtown more livable.
Yeah.
And
it wasn't about safety.
That's right. It wasn't about public safety. It was about profits, and we'll get into that more. But they wanted to make downtown livable, and Target, in partnership with the City of Minneapolis and Hennepin County, they crafted this plan. They wanted to grow the downtown population. They wanted to build housing. They wanted to build luxury housing. They wanted to increase the downtown tax base. And so in order to do that, in order to accomplish that goal, they needed to get rid of the undesirable elements. There was a hyper focus on targeting Black youth, criminalizing Black youth in downtown Minneapolis. And so all of this led to the creation of what they called the safe zone. And so viewers, I hope, are rightfully asking, safe for who, right? Because it certainly wasn't safe for the young men that I work with or the young women I work with. It certainly wasn't safe for people living in the homeless shelters in downtown or living on the streets. But they wanted to make it safe for people living in the condos, suburban people who were driving into downtown and going to work at Target headquarters. What they ended up doing was they launched a program that they called the Downtown 100. And on its surface, it was a list of the 100 top offenders in downtown Minneapolis. But as I dug into it and I researched this program, and like I said, I worked with young people that were on the program, I found out it wasn't a list of the top 100 offenders at all. In fact, the people that ended up on this list, who were almost all Black, I'm talking about over 90% Black on this list, in young people. Many of them were on the list not for having the most arrests in downtown, but rather for having the most police contacts.
Oh God, this part is so creepy, and I hate it so much.
Right.
Sorry, go on.
And so there's a big difference, right? So getting arrested, having an arrest record, or being cited, given numerous tickets for violating ordinances in downtown Minneapolis, that's one thing. but being contacted by the police. So the police see you frequently and they start harassing you, and they don't want you in downtown. That's completely different, right? That could be for simply because the police don't like you, or let's be real, racial profiling, right?
Exactly.
So that's what was happening, and that was many of the conversations that we had in the men's group that I facilitated were around that subject. And so, in fact, we ended up creating the men's group at the agency where I worked because of these issues. The young men I work with, they needed a safe place to meet and talk about these issues behind closed doors. And so when you create a list based on police contacts, you're giving police a lot of authority, right? Police have the discretion of who they wanted to go after. And what I want listeners to understand is Target was calling the shots. Target was the biggest employer in downtown Minneapolis. They were up until just a couple years ago. So for more than 20 years, Target was the biggest employer in downtown Minneapolis. Like I said, they funded the Hennepin County Attorney's Office. They funded the City Attorney's Office. They funded the Minneapolis Police. Target was calling the shots. It was Target Town.
Oh my God.
Their name is on the Target Center where the Timberwolves play basketball. Their name is on Target Field, the stadium where the Twins play baseball. So it really was and is Target Town. And so the Downtown 100 program, what we began to see was many of the people that ended up on this list, they were banished from downtown. So there was another list that they called the geo-restriction list, people who were geographically restricted from being downtown Minneapolis. They were successful in taking it to court. Prosecutors were successful in arguing it in court, saying this person should be banished from downtown for up to a year based on the Downtown 100, based on all these police contacts or arrests or citations. And many times it was less about arrests and citations and more about police contacts. And so, again, the surveillance camera system that Target donated helped them capture people on video doing things that were either illegal or in violation of ordinances. So again, not crimes, but behavior that was restricted, or doing things that the corporations just didn't like, that were bad for business. Loitering, right? So loitering, again, it's not a crime, it's a violation. But who determines what is loitering? There's a lot of wiggle room, right? So hanging out too long in front of the downtown Target, even if you're waiting on your bus and you have a valid reason to be downtown, you could be picked up for loitering. And so the geo restrictions, they sold it to the public as a diversion. Instead of sending these people to jail or to prison, we're going to just banish them from downtown. And of course, that was celebrated, right? Oh, look, we're not locking people up, even though they were also locking people up, right? But they were able to get community support behind that because they called it a diversion program. And by community support, I mean corporations and businesses, right? And so the safe zone, it grew into this massive surveillance apparatus. They partnered with other businesses and corporations downtown, private security. They created a massive network through surveillance cameras, through human surveillance. So security and downtown ambassadors who were charged with cleaning up the streets downtown. They all were linked into a walkie-talkie system. The downtown network cameras all fed into what they called a fusion center. It was established by Target, and it was located in the Minneapolis 1st Precinct Police Station, which is right there in downtown Minneapolis. And so it was a public-private partnership, and they increased police presence in downtown Minneapolis during the summertime when business was booming, when people are downtown for sports games and concerts and bar hopping and all that stuff. It ended up becoming a major feeder for prison and jails.
Yeah.
And so Target, they what I found out in my investigation was they were training the Minneapolis police to aggressively go after panhandlers and to surveil online as well as in person. Target was really behind what they tried to sell to the public is cleaning up the streets, but really what they were doing was they were criminalizing populations that they considered undesirable and bad for business.
Thank you so much for that explanation. The story here is so multifaceted and so intricate, and you have detailed it with so much care in your investigative reporting. So I highly recommend that if folks want to hear that in more detail, go and check out this 12-part series. It's really, really mind-melting. But yeah, so now that we've talked a little bit about this mass surveillance program in partnership with the police, I wanted to talk about and just ask you how this program has already expanded to cities across America, and what does this mean for the customers at these locations?
Yeah, so we saw within the first year of Target donating security cameras to the city of Minneapolis and establishing the Safe Zone, they created what they called the Safe Cities Initiative. And so Safe City ended up in more than 24 cities across the U.S. Some of the cities are on the Safe City list were Baltimore, Flint, Michigan, D.C., Atlanta, Compton, California. So Erica, when you hear those cities, what do you think of? What is a common thread when you hear when I name those cities? That's right.
Black.
Black populations, right? And so
Yep.
not all of the cities were known for having majority black populations. Like obviously Minneapolis is a very white city. Tucson, Arizona is not a black city. It was also on the list. But after realizing what they were doing in Minneapolis and how they were targeting the black population, especially black youth, it became very apparent that this program, it was not just a mass surveillance program, but it was a racialized surveillance program.
Yeah.
Somebody recently commented on social media, somebody from Ferguson, they said that, after the Ferguson police murdered Michael Brown, and I believe it was 2014, the military, was sent into St. Louis to crush the protesters.
Mm-hmm.
And this person commented how, after hearing about my investigative work about Target in its surveillance project, a light bulb kind of went off, and they remembered how the military set up shop for weeks in Target's parking lot as they were trying to crush the protests in Ferguson. And so, what it means to people in these cities, to customers shopping at the Targets in these so-called safe cities, this isn't just a surveillance program that focuses on their stores. Target, they surveil the communities in which they do business. So you don't have to step a foot inside Target's store in order to be under Target surveillance. And so what it means is that Target, a private corporation, is collecting massive data on the populations in these communities, in these cities, right? Target has massive data mining operations. Target is turning over this data to local law enforcement, to FBI, to ICE, right? So I tell my immigrant friends, I warn them, never step foot in Target.
Yes.
Whether Donald Trump is the president or a Democrat is in office. Don't step foot in Target. You would be smart to avoid Target. And of course, it's not just Target. These practices are becoming common practices amongst most major retailers. But my focus was on Target because it's a Minneapolis corporation, and Target stands out compared to all retailers across the country. And it's not just me saying that. Bloomberg Business Week, they did an investigation following my report. And they flew to Minneapolis. They interviewed me, and they
Wow.
interviewed some of the young people that I worked with and some of the social workers
Amazing.
that I interviewed. And they said the same thing, right? Target stands out. Target is on a whole nother level that Walmart isn't on, right? That some of your other favorite retailers might have similar data mining and surveillance operations, but Target is really in a league of its own.
And do you think that's because there's so much racism embedded within the leadership of Target, the executives of Target?
Yeah, so I interviewed a former Target insider, and they told me that specifically they were close with the CEO. So the CEO at the time when Target went from underneath the Dayton's umbrella to becoming Target Corporation, they incorporated around 2000, and when they moved their headquarters to downtown Minneapolis, the CEO, that was all under Robert Ulrich. He's still alive. He's a real old dude right now. But this person who I interviewed told me it was an open secret within Target's leadership that Ulrich was racist, that he referred to black men uh, as the N word, especially black men hanging out outside of the downtown Target store. And they told me there was a famous saying that he liked to say, and this person they they were so disturbed by it that they said they'll never forget it. But he was a big proponent of bringing back the death penalty. Minnesota abolished the death penalty a long time ago, probably 100 years ago, and he was an advocate for bringing back the death penalty. And he said, I don't just want the electric chair. I want to see an electric couch. Line them up. And and my first, question was, who's they? Who's he talking about?
Yeah, yeah,
Right.
exactly. Oh my
And
God.
and so this person, they told me, well, he would say lawbreakers, but we could read in between the lines, right?
Yeah,
He
yeah.
he he was staunchly anti-black, and and it was his personal politics drove the politics of the corporation and helped form safe city policies, right? So the safe zone, the safe city initiative was anti-black in nature from its inception, right?
Wow, yeah.
And one thing, I didn't make clear that I want to make clear is the public-private partnership that Honeywell started, called Minnesota Heals, in the late '90s, evolved into the Safe Zone. It just rebranded, took on a new name, but it was the same public-private partnership that Honeywell began in the late '90s. Target really ran with it, and it took a new shape in the early 2000s.
And it makes sense that like it's a weapons manufacturer that they're like following in the footsteps of, doing all of this highly, you know, high tech law enforcement stuff that they're involved with. And moving back a tiny bit in what you were saying, like, I asked you, like, how is this going to affect customers and stuff? That we're going to talk a little bit about how Target is producing very detailed dossiers on people that walk into their stores, including children, which is fucking mind blowing. And I also wanted to add that I learned from your reporting that they are also working with the police to teach them how to like monitor people's social media accounts and things like that, which is like, ooh, that's really creepy. Like
That's right.
everyone listening here should be like, yeah, lots of alarm bells ringing.
Absolutely.
But yeah, so I think it would be really eye-opening to tell our listeners a bit about the kind of sophisticated technology that the company has been employing in what amounts to a corporate domestic spying program.
Yeah. So, I mean, we're talking about going back over 20 years ago when Target donated surveillance cameras to the city of Minneapolis. They started using facial recognition technology in their stores. And so Target was one of the pioneering retail companies that use facial recognition technology when it was unheard of, when nobody knew what it was. So again, we're talking about going back 20 years, even though they deny that they ever really used it in any real way. It's just demonstrably false, right? Like there's plenty of documentation that shows that they were using it. And so their cameras within their stores, but this is going back to 2010 or before, that are called gaze trackers. So these gaze trackers hide in the shelves and they monitor customers. And if you're hovering in front of a shelf for too long, it alerts Target staff and they begin to watch you because they claim that it is a sign of shoplifting. And so.
And that's me just sitting there, like, trying to read the label and like
Right,
figure out
exactly.
what's in the food I'm buying.
Exactly. Additionally, Target staff, they built and patented algorithms that can ascertain whether an individual shopper is displaying the behavioral characteristics of a thief, such as hovering in front of expensive electronics or deviating from a standard shopping pattern. And that's from Bloomberg's reporting on Target's mass surveillance program. And so, according to a Target executive, he said, this is from Reuters. He said Target can identify by name more than half of the customers who walk into their stores nationwide or who browse their website. Right.
God.
So Target has super sophisticated technology, and like I said, most of the stuff that I'm talking about is 15 to 20 years old. So who knows how sophisticated it is today in 2025? I have no idea. But you better believe it's far more sophisticated than it was 20 years ago.
Yeah. Yeah. And I wonder what kind of a dossier they have on me, because I have definitely been in a Target before.
That's right.
And I am never going in a Target for the rest of my fucking life. There are so many other disturbing things about the like high tech, sophisticated technology that they're using. Their forensics labs that they built surpassed local law enforcement in sophistication, which is scary, really scary.
Yep, and it's a accredited forensics lab, and so there are tons of forensics labs in the U.S. and around the world, but most of them are not accredited, and so they're able to say it's a state of the art forensics lab, and because of the accreditation, Target frequently testifies on behalf of the state, on behalf of police, to lock people up in trials.
It's so dystopian. It's so disturbing. When I asked you if there was anything specific you wanted to focus on today, you brought up Madhi Ali, who was wrongfully convicted of a triple homicide when he was 15 years old. You wrote an incredible investigative piece in Unicorn Riot about the wrongful conviction and Target's role in the framing of this Black boy. The piece is titled Target, Junk Science and Unreliable Testimonies, the Contentious Conviction of 15-year-old Madhi Ali. Can you share some of the important details of this outrageous story and talk about why it should alarm all of us?
Yeah. So first of all, I didn't even know about this case until I started investigating Target and doing a deep dive research. And I found in a Minnesota Public Radio news article about the case where Target forensics experts who testified in court against Madhi Ali to help incarcerate him. They were bragging about their crime lab and how they often partner with police and prosecutors to bust criminals, right? So as I was researching, I saw the story about this kid who had always maintained his innocence, and I thought, this case is worth digging into deeper.
Yeah.
Because of everything I knew about Target and its drive to lock up Black youth, innocent Black youth, including young Black men that I worked with. And so what I found was pretty disturbing. Just from kind of a cursory look into his case, it appeared that he was framed, it appeared he was set up, and it appeared he was innocent. And so it took me a while to really dive into his case. And so that story that you just mentioned, it's my last report in my 12-part investigative series that was just published last summer. And once I was able to really dig into the police report, trial transcripts, talk to Madhi Ali. He calls me from prison. I talked to community members. I talked to former teachers. I found out very very positively that he is innocent, and he was framed. And so just some of the key details about this case is that his conviction was based on junk science. So the only evidence that linked him to the crime, so it was a triple homicide that happened in a convenience store in South Minneapolis in January 2010. Madhi was 15 years old at the time. The only evidence that linked him to the crime was contaminated DNA evidence that police claimed that they found on some jeans of Madhi's once they raided his apartment.
Which were also contaminated with the DNA of multiple other people.
That's right, including an investigator, right? A state investigator.
Yeah.
And so Madhi is adamant that the blood evidence that they found on his jeans was planted. And it certainly appears that way. And so so the contamination is a red flag, but also the DNA evidence was never presented. It was never even mentioned in any of the police reports until 3 months after police raided his home and confiscated those jeans. So they had the jeans for 3 months, 3 months after these murders happened. And then they finally discovered there was this blood evidence, DNA.
Yeah, you don't discover the drop of blood that whole time you have it. Like, what are you doing?
Right. So it's super shady. And so Madhi, he remembers at the time that he believed that the case against him was going to get dropped until they found this DNA evidence. So that's the way he remembers it. I couldn't include that in my report because I wasn't able to verify that, but I was able to verify that the DNA evidence was not mentioned on the police report until over 3 months after the murders happened. And so Target's role, so there's two Target forensic specialists who testified in court saying that the jeans the killer was wearing in the surveillance video matched the jeans that they found in Madhi's home, right? Now, this same Target forensic specialist, when he was cross-examined, he admitted that they can't even actually tell the color of jeans on video.
Oh my God.
So he was really, he was making up shit, right?
Yeah.
Another point in the case where Target testified in court was about the height of the killer. So again, so the murders were caught on surveillance video, but the killer and his accomplice were both wearing ski masks, so you couldn't see their face. You could tell that they were black youth. They were actually Somali youth, refugee kids, as is Madhi. Madhi is a refugee. One of the Target forensic specialists testified and said that the height of the killer in the video was close to Madhi's height. Now, as I looked at the police reports, I found out that's just factually wrong, right? So Madhi is actually listed on the police report as being 5'8". The accomplice, who's in the video, who was positively identified in the video, who was convicted and served prison, and admitted to his role, is listed as 6'1", right? So we're talking about 5 inches. That's almost, we're talking about nearly a half a foot height difference between Madhi Ali and the guy who was actually convicted as being an accomplice in these murders. Now, when you look at the video of the killing, you don't see the same height discrepancy between the killer and the accomplice, right? There maybe is an inch or two height difference between the killer and the accomplice, but there's certainly not a 5 inch or almost a half a foot height difference. But because of Target's testimony, they were able to sway the jury, again, not based on science, but based on Target's reputation in the community, and its reputation as a corporation around the country. And then so junk science was a major proponent in wrongfully incarcerating Madhi Ali, but also witness testimonies. So the actual original suspect, the person who was originally suspected as being the killer, testified in court. He was one of the star witnesses for the state who testified against Madhi Ali. And the original suspect, who I believe I'm almost, I'm 99% certain he is the killer. He's the cousin of the accomplice, the guy who was in the store with him, who actually admitted his role and who was incarcerated for 12 years for his role in this triple homicide. So the two star witnesses on behalf of the state who testified against Madhi were the likely killer, the original suspect, and the accomplice. And so the accomplice, he later went on our local Fox affiliate and said that he was coerced by the police to testify against Madhi. Madhi was his friend. Madhi was targeted by the police because Madhi was with these two guys earlier that day. They were all friends. Actually, the original killer, the original suspect, who was originally named as the killer, him and Madhi were kind of frenemies. They all went to junior high school together and high school together. But Madhi and the guy who, I'm not going to name his name, but they had fought. And this guy, he admitted to the Minneapolis police that he didn't like Madhi, which was a red flag. He had a reason to frame Madhi.
Yeah.
But not only that, there were other witnesses who police interviewed, and this is all in the police report, who said that these two guys were planning on framing Madhi for the crimes that they committed. That's in the police report. So how did the original killer, the person who was originally named as the killer, how did he get off so easily by the police? His alibi was complete rubbish. If you read his alibi in the police report, it's full of shit. He's lying. He's telling obvious lies. He got on the witness stand, testified against Madhi, and told some obvious lies in court. None of it was challenged. And then additionally, the state had two snitches who also testified against Madhi. One was a police informant, a paid police informant, and I dug really deep into this and exposed this guy. On the police report, his name is blacked out, but there are parts in the police report where they forgot to black out his name. And so he's named as a confidential, reliable informant, which means he was a paid police informant. And so this guy, he said Madhi told him 2 weeks before the killings happened that he was planning on robbing this market. And let me inform you that the market where the killings happened are literally directly across the street from Madhi's apartment. So Madhi told me, number one, he said he's not a killer. He never had a gun, never held a gun, never shot a gun.
Wow.
And adamantly denied committing these crimes. But number two, he said, I would never be dumb enough to commit these crimes at the market across the street from my house, right?
Oh my God.
And so one thing I forgot to mention too is the kids actually went in the store to rob the place. The robbery went wrong, as robberies do, and they ended up shooting and killing 3 people in the store, including 2 employees. And I don't want to undermine the tragedy of those crimes. The families of the people who were killed have my utmost sympathy and empathy, and they deserve justice. But they're not getting justice by locking up the wrong person for the crimes, while the actual killer is free on the loose.
Yeah.
So just to kind of close up this case about Madhi Ali, on the surveillance video, the killer is actually wearing the coat of the guy who was the original suspect. and the guy who testified against Madhi. And this guy, he admitted it in court when he was testifying against Madhi. He was asked if the coat the killer was wearing in the video belonged to him, and he said yes. But he conveniently made up a lie and said, but I gave that coat to Madhi earlier in the day because Madhi didn't have a jacket. Of course, Madhi told me that was an absolute lie, and it was just really convenient for him to, name Madhi and get away scot-free. And then the last thing I just want to say, this was not included in my report, but the guy who was named as the original killer, he was also 15 years old. He had two brothers who worked for the Minneapolis police.
My God.
One of them is on the police force today. He's actually a commander on the Minneapolis police. So if listeners are wondering why on earth would the police let a killer walk away and incarcerate and frame an innocent kid? Well, there are plenty of reasons. But one reason is because the likely killer is very much connected with the Minneapolis police. And so it's such a tragic story. I hope listeners go to Unicorn Riot's website, www.unicornriot.ninja, and read my report about Madhi Ali. His story is the type of stories that movies are made of. One thing I just want to tell listeners is that Madhi, he was trafficked from Africa when he was 9 years old. He was adopted at birth. His birth mother, his biological mother, almost died during delivery, so she gave him up to her family members who raised him, who he always thought were his parents. He never knew they were not his parents until he was arrested for the murder in 2010. That's when he found out that these people were not actually his parents. But he grew up in a refugee camp in Kenya. The people that raised him, they couldn't come because their child had died. So they needed a child. And their child's name was Madhi Ali, the kid who died. And so the guy who we've come to know as Madhi Ali, his real name is actually Khalid Farah. And Khalid Farah and Madhi Ali were like best friends when they were kids. And his friend died. And then his friend's parents needed him to come to America with them on their visa. And as soon as they arrived in Minneapolis, they abandoned him. And he ended up in social services. He ended up in and out of juvenile detention centers. And he admitted to me, he wasn't an angel, right? He was homeless. He stole a lot. He committed petty crimes. But he said he wasn't a violent criminal. He was never arrested for any violent crimes. But he was the perfect scapegoat to blame these crimes on. And so, again, I encourage people to check out the story about Madhi Ali and help uplift his story, and hopefully we can get him freed from prison.
I'm sure there's a way for folks to actually write to him in prison, which, I've more and more doing this work, I'm realizing the value of, support like that, of showing up for people who are imprisoned, who are incarcerated, and just being a human in their lives that is real with them. So yeah, maybe we can add some of that information in the show notes so people can reach out if they want to.
Absolutely. And I talk to him regularly. He still calls me.
Oh, wow.
And I know he would very much appreciate receiving letters from supporters. So
yeah, what a absolutely devastating story. And I mean, it after watching so much true crime, so many true crime documentaries, there are so many reasons why police decide to frame people for crimes. Either they just need to act like they solve something or, they have other agendas there at place. But yeah, it's such a common story. It's such a bizarrely common story that they will end up trying to force someone to be the fall guy for whatever crime that they're trying to solve.
That's right. And I just want to add, from my own research, I've often realized that many times when police and prosecutors incarcerate the wrong person, when it's obviously the wrong person, often it's because the actual criminal, whether it's a killer or whatever, was working for the police.
Oh gosh. Wow. Yep. That makes so much sense. So I wanted to ask about the capitalist profit motive, which is so at the heart of this story, and we haven't directly addressed that too much yet. If you want to talk about that a little bit.
Sure. So one thing I mentioned was what prosecutors and police refer to as livability crimes. They're not real crimes, like they're non-crimes. They're ordinance violations or nuisances. But basically, the name livability crimes comes from, they argue that there are things like, graffiti, littering, shoplifting, stealing, things like that make a community less desirable for people to live in, especially upper income people, right? So what I uncovered in my investigation into Target's massive surveillance project was it was never really about public safety at all, right? It was about the appearance of crime. It was about the feeling of shoppers, of workers at Target's headquarters, of feeling safe, right?
Yeah.
And again, so we're talking about white, their Target's white suburban base, Target's white employee base, being afraid of black people, being afraid of homeless people. It was about business, right? And these populations were bad for business. Again, it was never about public safety. It's about surveillance. It's about data mining. And what I learned was how Target monetizes from all of this massive data that it's collecting on not just the street populations that I named, but their own customer base, right? So data mining is big business. And so what I found was there's a quote from a Target executive who said he admitted that Target's most important asset is its data analytics on its customers, not the retail products in its more than 2,000 stores across the country and across the world, not the properties they own, right? Target owns all, most, if not all of its stores and the buildings. And, so it's also, this massive real estate company, right? But, you could take all of that combined and it does not amount to the data analytics that it has on its customers. That is its prized possession, according to Target's own executive, right? And there's another quote that I just wanted to share that kind of drives home the point that this was never really about public safety. Actually, there's a couple quotes that I just want to share. One, this is from a Minneapolis police official. He said, "It sounds silly, but the word that people used to describe the downtown area was icky." So they ran focus groups on people that work downtown and people that shop downtown. And icky was the word that kept coming up, right? So it wasn't crime, it wasn't safety, it was icky, right? And then, there's another quote from a Target executive who said, "Quite frankly, what we looked at was for our Target shopping experience. The guest demographic we seek is very much a woman with children. They value safety, whether parking their car or coming in to shop without much concern. In fact, we try to create a shopping experience that's not just a commodity exchange, but a pleasurable experience. The guest experience, as we call it, is a very big contrast in that we want to be a lot more like Disney World and a lot less like a flea market." Now, I thought that quote was it was very telling because what sort of images do listeners conjure up when they hear Disney World? Personally, I think of white families, right, with money, right?
Yeah.
Like my family, we didn't have money to go to Disney World when I was a kid.
Yeah.
And what images do people conjure up when they hear the words flea market,
Oh God.
right?
Oh, you're so right. Ugh.
So there's this racialized language that is consistent with what a former Target insider told me of how the Target CEO who created the safe zone, who pioneered all of this, how he really felt about Black people and people of color and undesirable populations that they wanted to get rid of out of downtown Minneapolis. So
Yes.
again, this was never about public safety. This was about business, and this was about profits and surveillance and massive data mining on its customers and on the general public is very profitable. And incarcerating Black people in the United States has always been profitable, right? So Target is one of the major retailers that the products in Target's shelf, along with other major retailers such as Walmart, are are heavily produced by prison labor. So the more
Mm-hmm.
people incarcerated, the more cheap labor to produce cheap products to sit
Mm-hmm.
on Target's shelf. And in other words, slavery, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I'm so glad that you shared some of those quotes, which were some of the things that stood out to me the most when I was doing the research to prepare for this episode. But there was one quote that stood out to me the very most that I thought I wanted to ask you about. It's in a 2006 Washington Post article. Target's top executives made startling revelations, including the following statement from the company's former vice president of government affairs, Nathan K. Garvis. He said, "In many ways, Target is actually a high-tech company masquerading as a retailer." And that is just so telling. The fact that they are saying that they are masquerading as a retailer is like one of the most bizarre and like, oh, you're really just saying the quiet part out loud, aren't you?
That's
You
right.
know, it's so
That's
wild.
right.
And I was wondering, I mean, is that how you see the company now? That they are that is their primary product? It's the data analytics. It's the data.
Yeah, so I mean, all of the evidence, it overwhelmingly suggests that, right? So he wasn't being sarcastic or facetious. He was saying the quiet part out loud. Believe them the first time when they tell you who they are, right?
Yeah, yeah,
So again, big data is very profitable, and Target should not be trusted with anybody's data because they have proven that they're irresponsible and their practices are quite shady.
yeah, yeah. And listeners out there, like, do not give them your data. Do not go into these stores. Don't even park in the parking lot. They're monitoring the license plates on your vehicle in the fucking parking lot. Like, this is
That's right.
how insidious and invasive their surveillance technology is.
That's right. They'll take pictures of they'll take pictures of your license plate number and they'll compile it in your file. They'll even have your driver's license information if you pull out your driver's license in the store, or they'll purchase
Yeah.
it from other data brokers. They
Mm-hmm.
compile all that information into a file, and including Target has files on your children. If you've ever
Yeah.
taken your children into a Target, they have they have data that they keep from their surveillance
Mm-hmm.
footage. They have other biometric data too, including fingerprints from people who touch products, and
Mm-hmm.
they'll tell you it's only shoplifters, but don't believe that.
Yeah. Yeah. And there's so many crazy things that I keep wanting to bring up in this story, but I just want to get through it. But like
Right.
one of the other crazy things is a story that maybe listeners might have heard of, where a really, really angry man went into a Target store, yelling at them saying, "What the fuck is this?" Basically about these marketing materials that were given to his, I think, 15-year-old daughter or something,
Hmm.
very young daughter, that were marketing like pregnancy products and things to this person. And it turned out that the daughter was in fact pregnant, and they were, because they are monitoring so much data about people, they knew that this young girl was pregnant before even the family knew. And so
That's right.
there was a whole like scandal around that.
That's
So
right.
yeah.
And Target is named in several class action lawsuits for stealing people's data. And so, so yeah, people need to really be cautious about giving their data away to companies like Target.
Yeah, absolutely. And especially knowing that they are partnering with the feds and
Right.
ICE, it's wild that like they can be amassing all this information and literally handing it over to the government.
Right.
So there's been a call for a national boycott of Target for getting rid of its diversity, equity, and inclusion program. Can you talk about how this is actually an opportunity to shine light on the dystopian practices of this multinational megacorporation and expand the demands that are being made of this retail giant? And what can we be doing to kind of hold Target accountable?
Yes. Yeah, no, I think that rolling back its DEI program is really some of the least harmful things Target has done. And so I would really like to see the boycott leaders and organizers expand those demands. I think some of the most important things would be to call on Target to divest from policing, to divest from funding prosecutors and city attorneys like they have done here in Minneapolis for decades. They're not the only corporation doing this. Corporations in other cities are doing this. I think those are some of the most important demands that should be lifted up. Calling on Target to really divest from its massive surveillance apparatus. Be transparent with what it has done with its data that it's collected on customers and the general public. I think those really need to be at the top of the demands. And also calling for the exoneration of Madhi Ali and anybody else who has been wrongfully incarcerated by Target Corporation. Calling for the expungement of the records of people who were on the downtown the downtown 100 list, people who were geo-restricted from downtown Minneapolis, banishing the geo-restriction, right? Like that idea is
basically.
Absolutely. And it was actually the geographic restriction that inspired the name of my series, 21st Century Jim Crow in the North Star City. The irony of that title, right? I think those really need to be at the top of organizers' demands. DEI to me it's just a footnote. And so, I think there are some actionable steps, listeners can take. I think first and foremost, protect yourself. Protect your data. Delete the Target app that's on your phone. Get rid of that. There's been a lot of people online, the organizers here in Minneapolis who first called for the national boycott at their press conference. They cut up their Target credit cards and they encouraged other people to do that. I support that. I think listeners ought to put pressure on the boycott organizers to expand these demands that I mentioned, right? People should reach out directly to Target, put pressure on Target to meet these demands. There's an old petition from after George Floyd was murdered. It's on coworker.com calling on Target Corporation to stop funding police departments and support our communities. And hopefully we could put a link to that on your website. And I'm not a huge fan of petitions. I don't think they're super effective, especially without grassroots organizing. But it is an actionable step that people can take. And sometimes petitions do take off. I know here in Minneapolis, there has been a petition in recent years that helped lead to the exoneration of a young man who was wrongfully convicted and framed by the Minneapolis police.
Wow.
In his case, I couldn't find any involvement by Target, but nevertheless, there are actionable steps, people can take. And one last thing people can do is contact the Hennepin County Attorney's Office, Mary Moriarty, who she is very much a reformer prosecutor. She is on the side of the wrongfully convicted. But nevertheless, people need to put pressure on her to review Madhi Ali's case. So any of your listeners who who believe that Madhi Ali is innocent, or who trust my reporting and want to dig further into it, please do so. And after you do so, put pressure on the Hennepin County Attorney's Office. You can even put pressure on the Attorney General of Minnesota, Keith Ellison, who also has a conviction review unit, although they have been quite ineffective. But we need to apply pressure on prosecutors to review any and every case that Target has ever touched.
Yeah. My God. Yeah, because it's clear from the Madhi Ali case that, their incentives, their motivations here can be very nefarious. So yeah, this
That's right.
needs to be reviewed.
And let me just share the contact information for the Hennepin County
Thank
Attorney's
you.
Office
Yeah.
who incarcerated Madhi Ali. The phone number is 612-348-5550. And listeners can email them at citizeninfo@hennepin.us. Again, that's citizeninfo@hennepin.us. And
Perfect.
again, please advocate for the review of Madhi Ali's case and for his exoneration.
Yeah, that's so important. And thank you so much for really focusing on that story, which really brings the atrocities of what Target is doing fully to light. And it brings it into a really human dimension, having one person's story who's had their whole life rocked by this and stolen from him. It's such a devastating and impactful story. So I'm really glad that you focused so much of your attention on that. I want to tell everyone to go listen to People Powered Podcast. It's a great fucking show. It's really, really good at, highlighting those voices from folks who are, from the grassroots. And it is really, really, it's a really inspiring show. So
thank you. And the program has been on hiatus for a while, but I definitely plan on coming back and doing a few more episodes. Maybe this summer. But hopefully sometime soon. But thank you for that shout out.
Awesome. Yeah, totally. And is there anything else that we should shout out before I let you go?
Absolutely. I want to shout out Unicorn Riot, my homie Nico, Dan, all the good folks over there who've published my work and put up with me over the years. Big shout out to them. So they were on the front lines during the uprising after George Floyd was murdered. Wow. Many people who were watching the live streams of the protest were able to do that because Unicorn Riot was on the ground filming it, including when protesters burnt down the police precinct across the street from Target, right?
The burnt out precinct.
That's right. But also I want to shout out the homie Aaron, DJ ADD on Instagram. He interviewed me a week ago in front of the South Minneapolis Target that was looted after George Floyd's murder. And the interview has just went viral. There's like almost 500,000 views. So shout out to him. He was one of the first people that reached out to me after Target was in the headlines for cutting back its DEI. And he has followed my investigative series for a while. And so he immediately wanted to get me on video going deeper into Target's harm that they've done to our community. Last but not least, I want to shout out Madhi Ali. He is he's in Rush City prison in Minnesota. It's about 2 hours outside of the city, and I'm praying that this year his case will be reviewed and that the courts will see what I see, that he is 100% innocent, that he was framed by the police, by prosecutors, by Target, and that he will be freed this year.
How old is he now?
He's 30 years old. He turned 30 last summer. And so his 15-year anniversary just passed actually a few weeks ago of the murders from 2010. So he's been locked up more than half his life, and hopefully his incarceration will come to an end real soon. And thank you for giving me a national platform to not only share all the work that I've done researching Target, but to share Madhi Ali's story. So shout out to you, Erica.
Oh, thank you. Yeah. No, it's truly, truly an honor to have you on the show. And I read every piece of this 12-part investigative reporting series with like so much just fascination and excitement. It was so incredibly deep and just, such cutting reporting. Everyone go follow everything that Marjaan Sirdar does in the future because it's going to be great.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Hey, everyone. Thank you all for tuning into this episode. If you value the work that we're doing, we would deeply appreciate your support. This project involves a huge amount of research, networking, content creation, and editing. You can lend a hand by giving us a rating and writing a review, or you can contribute financially by signing up on Patreon. To all of our existing patrons, thank you so goddamn much. Your support makes a huge difference for this anti-capitalist project. Much love to you all. Cheers and solidarity.